Brain Supreme podcast, number 5. I'm with my friend, Andy Wakefield, the guy who, well, Rudolf Steiner started it all, but really one of the guys who started it all, who began it all. Andy, I want to tell the story of how we met, and then you become the guest, because I think the story of how we met is really cool. So it was early 2000s. I was living in Los Angeles. I was living with my then girlfriend, who's now my wife. And we lived in what I called Hasidville. It was where all the Orthodox Jews lived. And the family across from us, the Rycheks, they ran the local Lubavitcher Center, which is the Chabad kind of rabbi. And it was every Shabbos, every Friday was like a gathering of the misfits. So all the Jews from the neighborhood, like ultra-Orthodox, like bizarre, who didn't have a place to go for the Shabbat for Friday dinner would come over to their place. And we used to go over to their place quite a bit. It was crazy. She was a great host. She had 5 children, all healthy and beautiful. Her 6th child, a gorgeous 2.5-year-old girl, like vivacious, energetic, went in for the 3rd MMR shot, and then like that day, banging her head, spinning, fevers, like she went off the chart autism from like perfectly healthy to the next day. And I was like, I was 30 years old. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, that's not normal. What happened? And so I became very suspicious of that from that standpoint. And then I was teaching at a yoga center, and one of my students was Alicia Silverstone's first husband. And she told me about this film that she had been working on or in conjunction with. And then I forget actually how it happened, but I saw, like, you came into my world, and I remember being at a screening or something in LA where you spoke, and I was very moved, and it really informed my wife and I what we were going to do, and it started the education process. 2015, I'm on a street corner in Studio City having a meeting with like a cannabis kingpin, and you walk out of the Starbucks, and I jump up, and I'm like, Andy Wakefield, and you have this look in your face like, uh-oh, is this the guy? Is this the bullet come for me? I'm like, no, I'm a fan. And you had this look like, what? And I'm like, and I put my hand out and I said, you don't know me. I saw you once. I know all about you. I know your life story. God bless you. And I shook your hand. I said, you're doing God's work. Keep up the good work. And it was this very touching moment. I have no idea whether you recall it or not. And then 7 years, it was, I guess, 7.5 years later, 2022 and a half, I'm at Trianone Coffee here in Westlake, Austin, Texas. And I'm with the guy who I'm going to interview, who I'm interviewing about doing some website stuff for Brain Supreme. And you're standing in front of me, and I'm like, Andrew Wakefield, and you turn around and you're like, only my mother calls me Andrew. And so I'm like, Andy Wakefield. And so you have this look on your face like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, no, I'm a fan. And I tell my guy, I'm not going to steal the story, but I tell my guy, oh, this is Andy Wakefield. He's the poster child for pharmaceutical character assassination. And in 45 seconds, I rattle off your resume, and you're like, you really are a fan. And so I'm like, dude, I mean, I'm quite certain that you saved my 2nd child from probably being autistic, because he's like, my wife was 40, all the telltale signs. And then you say, what are you doing here? I say, oh, Brain Supreme, blah, blah. And you say, oh, I'm interested in that. And I reach down and I give you a packet of Genius, and I'm like, God bless you. Here's the gift. And then you say, can I have your phone number in case I want to order more? So I'm like, yeah, sure. Okay. I usually, at that point, I was hand selling a lot. I'd give it 5 or 10 days. Usually 10 days I'd check in with all my clients and customers, because they were few and far between at that time. And 4 days later, I get a phone call at 9 a.m. And I'm like, this is weird. It's Andy Wakefield. And I'm like, Andy? And you're like, Adam, hey. I'm like, how you doing? You're like, you got a second? I'm like, yeah, sure. And you're like, I make movies. And I said, yeah, documentary, I've seen them. No, also fiction. And I write fiction. I said, oh, that's great. And he said to me, 10 years ago, I wrote the best piece of fiction I've ever written, and I don't have an ending for it, and it sits in a drawer, and it torments me every day of my life. I woke up at 4 a.m. this morning with the ending complete in my mind. I just finished writing, and it's the best thing I've ever written. And the only thing I'm doing different is I'm on day 4 of Brain Supreme. How can I get more? I'm like, I'll be right over.
That's right. I remember it. Yeah.
So the culmination of that story is then, of course, we became friends. You said, you need to meet my son. He's into this stuff. He's a marketing guy. Now, your son, Sam Wakefield, is one of my best friends and a business partner of mine now. And he literally took us from like a word of mouth thing to build the website and got us off. So I love you for years and respect you. And now your son's one of my best friends. So it's like my favorite Brain Supreme story to tell.
Oh, great. I know it was a wonderful time. I was in LA at that time. I went there to finish a screenplay. In fact, one that became the movie Protocol 7, working with Terry Rossio, who's a little-known screenwriter who wrote Shrek, Pirates of the Caribbean, Aladdin, Godzilla versus King Kong. That was wonderful. And then
this is 2015.
And then I got stopped outside Starbucks in Studio City by this homeless guy. I said, "Oh, what's he going to do? Bum another cup of coffee?" And it was you. And there we were. And and that was fascinating because when I took it, I'd been struggling with the story. It was a sort of homage to Henri Toulouse-Lautrec. It was set in late 19th century Paris. And I love the story. It was a kind of time warp romance, a sort of highly erotic love story. And I just could not nail the end. I just couldn't get, and then suddenly I did. And it was Brain Supreme. I was fascinated. So here we are.
Yeah. So tell us this, I mean, I've known you've told this 100 times, but like as history is now, and especially after, like, you're the guy who was right all along. And I hear your name mentioned from time to time on, different podcasts and shows, and like, Andy Wakefield was right. Andy Wakefield was right. So can you tell us the story for our listeners that might not be familiar in this generation? Tell us the story and, ultimately how you ended up being right and what you were ultimately correct about.
Well, yeah, delete everything you've read on Wikipedia and everything you've heard and start from the beginning. I was just a mainstream, whatever that means, mainstream physician, graduated in 1981 at St. Mary's Hospital Medical School in London. Now 7 generations of my family have been, have qualified as doctors from that medical school. Yeah.
So like...
way back.
1780s, 1750s?
Way back.
Wow.
And I was part of the University of London, which at the time still is, in fact, the biggest medical school in the world. And so I trained as a surgeon, got my fellowship of the Royal College of Surgeons, fellowship of the Royal College of Pathologists, and I put together a research team of about 19 people working at the Royal Free Hospital in London on inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, 2 sort of epidemic diseases for which we didn't have an answer in terms of what is causing this. Or these conditions. And that was really, really exciting times. It was great until 1995, when it took a turn and I got a call from a parent of a child with autism saying my child was absolutely fine, normal, very much like the story you've just told, developing normally, and had speech language interaction with their siblings, absolutely on their milestones, walking, sleeping well, and that all changed. They had an MMR, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, and within a very short space of time, the light in their eyes had gone out. They'd lost their speech, their interaction. They no longer play with their siblings. They didn't sleep at night. They're in pain. I know they're in pain, doctor. I'm his mother, and I can tell, even though he's lost the ability to communicate, I know he's in pain. And I said, look, I don't know why you're calling me. I know absolutely nothing about autism. I'm a gastroenterologist. And when I was at medical school, it was so rare. 1 in 10,000 kids, we weren't even taught about it.
Right.
And she said, doctor, the reason I'm calling you is because my child has intractable gastrointestinal problems, bloating, diarrhea, all of these things. And the doctors that I go to and the nurses say, oh, that's just part of autism. Get over it. Put them in a home, forget about it, have another child. And I just thought, this is bizarre. I mean, we're living in the Middle Ages. Yeah. This was madness. Children are born with this condition. It's intractable. It can't be treated. And this doesn't happen. Children don't regress. You thought your child was talking, that he was saying helicopter, a complex word. But no, he was just grunting and making noises. Right. I mean, it was the behavior of mainstream medicine to this problem was a disgrace, an absolute disgrace. And this story came to me from so many parents. It was so coherent, it was so consistent that I said, to my colleagues, we're going to look at this. And I put together a research team, including the world's leading pediatric gastroenterologist at the time, Professor John Walker-Smith. Eminent people between them had published 5,000 papers. I mean, this was a wonderful group of academics. And lo and behold, long story short, the parents were absolutely right. The children had intestinal inflammation. And then we went on after the Lancet paper, which I can talk about, to publish 15 further papers characterizing that bowel disease and showing that it was novel. It wasn't food allergy, it wasn't Crohn's, it wasn't colitis. It was something different. And that was fascinating. But here's the problem. We had linked it to the MMR vaccine, or the parents had told us this. And we have an obligation, an absolute obligation, particularly in fact, in view of the fact that the parents were right.
Yeah.
The medical profession has said, no, they don't have a bowel disease. And yes, they did. And then we had the videos of them before their behavioral decline, and they were speaking and talking. And the evidence was there that they had lost their skills. But oh no, medicine said regression does not happen. They're born with it. No, they're not. And so I found myself alienated, my colleagues saying, Andy, we're pediatricians. And as pediatricians, we cannot be seen to criticize the safety of MMR vaccine. I said, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? Your obligation is to these parents. That's what you've signed the Hippocratic Oath for. That's what you've taken this oath for. What do you mean? Is this because it affects the perception of your colleagues of you at the Royal Society? Because it's unfashionable to question vaccine safety? What about this story, which you've told me in private you absolutely believe, and it can only be the MMR vaccine? And so we, on moral and ethical grounds, we kind of drifted apart. And the dean then said to me, if you continue, I was in his office one day, I was leaving, he stopped me and he said, if you continue this vaccine safety work, it will not be good for your career. It was an explicit threat. He was absolutely right.
Yeah. It
wasn't good for my career, but there I was, an obstinate, enthusiastic young surgeon, and it just made me angry. What was I going to do? Go to the mother in the clinic with her child next to her, running around, banging his head on the floor, and say, I know your story's right, but I'm sorry. There's the door. Go and find someone else and shut it behind you. That's not what I signed up for. This wasn't brave or clever. It's just, I signed up to do this work. And I found such extraordinary pushback. So we published the paper in the Lancet. It was a case series. It didn't test any hypothesis of causation. It didn't say...
Just for our audience to know, the Lancet is the preeminent peer-reviewed medical journal in the world, correct? Or just
its reputation suffered dramatically after.
But at the time, it was the biggest accolade you can get is to get published in the Lancet.
Yeah, that got a lot of attention. And that attention was both good and bad. Of course, parents came flooded to us for help for their children, but at the same time, you had offended, and here's the problem. You had offended everybody, the pharmaceutical companies, the governments of the world, the professional organizations like the American Medical Association, who survive on endorsements, money from the pharmaceutical companies, by the media, people like Rupert Murdoch, who has a lot of investments in vaccines in Australia, and the World Health Organization, UNICEF, everybody. Now, people now are familiar with cancel culture, doctors being, and they're familiar with papers being retracted and doctors being removed because they've said something that goes against the grain, against the status quo. But then it was unheard of.
No, you were the poster child for that.
It was extraordinary, and they just came at me in the biggest way. And this isn't a hard luck Andy Wakefield story. It's just an historical series of events that I'm sort of relating to you.
Were you at all? Because it hadn't happened like that before to anybody. I mean, we're not that far off in age. So you were really the first to be just destroyed. Did you have any sense of what's coming for you, or were you perpetually flabbergasted and just stunned?
Well, the problem was it was access to the truth. I didn't control the media. The law, litigation, justice belongs to those who can afford it. So if you're one little guy surviving with 4 children on a limited salary, how is that going to play out? I mean, this is the problem, is that whatever the merits of the legal system, it belongs to those who can afford it. And of course, you were dealing with massive concerns like the pharmaceutical industry, who are hugely wealthy and utterly ruthless. So I thought that initially, I was so naive, I thought the government would be interested in this. They would want to do something about it. Here was an insight into a possible cause of at least some, if not a lot, of the autism that was occurring in this current pandemic of autism. So I soldiered on, and they referred me and my colleagues to the General Medical Council, our licensing body in the UK, and had us stripped of our licenses for a series of contrived charges, which were all proven to be wrong. When we finished that, which was the longest hearing in the history of the General Medical Council, my barrister, the lawyer with one of the wigs, said to me, on the basis of the evidence presented here, there is absolutely no way they can find you guilty on any count. They found me guilty on every single count. So justice was irrelevant. They had made their minds up before we went in. But I didn't stop the work. I was in the United States at that time, here in Austin, Texas, set up a center for children with autism, doing research and treatment and evaluation, educational evaluation. That was going well, and then they caught up with me here, and that was pulled as well. So it was, and here's the sort of potted summary. There are 2 elements to this, and I sort of pose this as a question to your audience, is if I really was the villain, the fraud, the liar, the child abuser that they said I was, why would I have then sued Brian Deer, the journalist, and the British Medical Journal, who published the allegations of fraud against me? Why would I seek to sue them here in the state of Texas? Mm-hmm. Why would I do it anywhere? Because it's about discovery. All of the truth will come out for everybody who wants to read in its entirety. So if it were true that I'd committed fraud, it would be self-evident. I'd be cutting my own throat.
Right.
I mean, why would you do that unless you were absolutely insane? And if you were, your lawyers would say to you, you're insane.
Right.
We're not going to fight this case on your behalf because what you say and what is written in the written record are 2 completely different things. That wasn't the case. It was all on our side, and we had the right in law to sue the British Medical Journal in Texas. Why? Because they profit. They sell their journal to Texas medical schools. And so there's a long-arm statute in Texas that allows us to do that. But the judge said, no, we are denying you jurisdiction. In other words, the judge turned out to be, her husband was intimately involved with medical associations and pharmaceutical companies. The conflict of interest was astonishing, but there's nothing you can do about it. So we tried to sue them. It was open season on discovery. Have it, look at it, read it, come to your own conclusions. And yet we didn't. So I just said, look, you know what? What happens to me isn't important. My reputation, it doesn't matter. What matters is what happens to these children. So get over yourself. Okay? It doesn't matter. Put all of that to one side. Just get on with the job. Now, at that time, of course, I had lost my career and I had lost my income, and I had to find some other way of feeding my family. And that's the film side of the story. But the other side of the story, the conclusion to the whole vaccine issue, was in 2001, I went to testify before the Congressional Oversight Committee in Washington about this issue. And then I met with the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And they said to me, Dr. Wakefield, look, every child gets MMR vaccine and only some develop autism. So how do you account for that? And I said, well, that's the way medicine works. A lot of people smoke. Some people develop lung cancer. Why? What are the cofactors that put these people at risk of lung cancer and these not? We don't know. But that's the reality. But here's what we think. Here's what I think. I think that part of the risk is age of exposure. The age at which children get the MMR vaccine determines their risk. The younger they get it, the greater the risk. Why? Because we know with natural measles infection, if you get it under the age of 1, you're at greater risk of a severe adverse event than if you get it later in life when it's a trivial disease. And so they said, okay, and they went away, and to their credit, they tested that hypothesis in Atlanta, Georgia, and they found it to be absolutely true. And for 14 years, they covered it up. They put millions of American children, by proxy children around the world, at risk of serious permanent neurological injury in order to protect their own credibility in the eyes of the public. It cannot be allowed to exist, was their word. And so they destroyed the documents, they hid the data, they contrived new data after they'd pushed and pulled it around any way they could, and they published a paper saying, we exonerate MMR from causing autism. 14 years. And then William Thompson, the senior scientist on that study, who designed the study, collected the data, interpreted the data, written the paper, came forward and said to my colleague, a scientist and father of an affected child, Brian Hooker, I can no longer live with myself. We committed fraud. Here is the evidence. And he gave us all the evidence. Brian contacted me. We recorded William Thompson. And in his own words, he describes how the fraud was committed.
Oh, wow.
And that was the basis of the film Vaxxed. And that changed so much.
Yeah.
So many people saw that film. The story is very interesting, and is that we thought we'll put it into one film festival, one premier film festival. Yeah. We put it into Tribeca, run by Robert De Niro.
Who has a vaccine-injured child.
He has a vaccine-injured child with severe autism. And it was accepted. Yes. This is wonderful. Now we can get it. And then a few weeks later, I got a call from Del Bigtree, my producer, saying, Andy, our film has been withdrawn. First time ever.
Yeah.
First time ever in the history of Tribeca Film Festival, they'd done this. And I got into a furious argument on the phone with Jane Rosenthal, who'd been responsible for making that happen.
Yeah.
And I knew that this was pressure from pharmaceutical interests sponsoring, and that's what it turned out to be. And Robert De Niro he was told another reason, and he found that wasn't true, and he was furious. And he went on the Today Show, he went on Good Morning America, and he said, we should not have done that. We should not have withdrawn that film. It should have played, and people should have made up their own minds. And that suddenly, he didn't want to talk about anything else. He just wanted to talk about Vaxxed.
Yeah.
And they tried to change the subject and get him onto something else. No, he was going to talk about this, and it exploded worldwide. So there is a situation, Adam, where censorship backfired.
Yeah.
It bit them in the ass in the biggest way, and Vaxxed became a global phenomenon.
Yeah.
And it changed a lot of people's minds.
I wanted to just go back. How old were your children when you were in the thick of it, when the assault was on?
It lasted for a very long time.
Yeah.
So the whole thing has been going now for 30 years plus. But really, the thick of the assault, they were probably, I think, my youngest son, Corin, had yet to be born. And my oldest was 8 to 10 years old, something like that.
What was the stress level like for you and your wife at the time? Like, how were you? Were you scared for your life ever? I mean, because I've got one kid at home with a calf injury and other kids in Europe, and there's some drama. Like, it's terrifying being a parent these days.
Oh, it is.
So what was that like for you as a dad? Those years.
It was, the brain has a wonderful defensive mechanism of erasing bad memories.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
It does.
We remember good things, we erase the bad things, because if we didn't,
yes,
we would not be able to cope.
Yeah.
And I guess that something like post-traumatic stress disorder for soldiers overcomes that barrier and prevails and eats them alive, and it's terrifying. But it was bad. It was very, very bad. It was terrifying for my family. So they'd come out of the front door to go to school, and there'd be hordes of press on the doorstep.
Yeah, Sam has shared that with me before.
Yeah. It was awful for them. And I, when I think about it, people say to me many, many times, do you have any regrets? I think the only misgiving I have about it is the consequences for my family. It was just relentless pressure. What they do is they publish an article in a newspaper, and before you've had time to overcome the recoil from that. The next article is published the following week, and so on and so on. So that it's a constant barrage. And you find yourself having to explain to everybody you know, all your friends, all your colleagues, no, this didn't happen. And that's what you do. You become just a sort of a vehicle for regurgitating. And you think, I can't do this anymore. I can't move forward from this pattern. And it really did become, it put a huge strain on us. My children, my family, my wife at the time and my children were incredibly supportive. Incredibly supportive. They've never shied away from the issue at all. They were so brave and so resolute, and they've stuck with it throughout. And now they've got their own children, and they are, they've made their own vaccine choices, and they're very pleased with them. And their children are extraordinarily fit and healthy. And so I hope that ultimately they'll remember that this is about trying to do the right thing, and that the consequences are not just for us. For all that time we spent apart, that I spent traveling the world talking about this and trying to defend myself in new American media, UK media, that it was worth it for their children and their children's children, that there was merit to it. But at the time, I missed them terribly. And they would say, Dad, you love these children more than you love us. I said, no, please. You in time you will come to understand, but I can't walk away from this for a million reasons. And if I do, these children, one, have no voice, and two, your children have no voice either.
Did you find you suffered from like disassociative stress? Because sometimes there'll be like, I'll be at a kid's sport, but there'll be so much dad stress going on. I'll have to like shake my head like, oh, I'm here. I'm actually here right now. Let me watch this. Was it? Because I can't imagine what the stress level must have been like.
It was extraordinary. We're looking back on it now. It was extraordinary. And then there was one night where it changed. And that was, I was down in Bandera out in the Badlands of Texas, out in the hills. Wonderful, beautiful place. And I was there. We were staying out there on a ranch. And that night I went out alone onto the ranch and looked up at the sky. And there were just billions and billions of stars. It was extraordinary. I'd never seen anything quite like it, other than when I was sailing the tall ships race. But there they were. And I looked up at the sky and I thought, you know what? The universe doesn't really give a shit about Andy Wakefield.
Yeah.
You're not important. In the great scheme of things, you're not important. So just get on with it.
Yeah.
Just get over yourself, put everything to one side. It doesn't matter. Get on with this job and give a voice to these children. And that sounds terribly sort of grand and noble. That was what happened. I just suddenly thought,
you had a catharsis.
If I am going to survive this and contribute to this issue, continue to contribute, then I have got to move forward. And it was that vision of the universe. And I thought, you know what? You are so small against the sky that you barely exist. So just get on with it, and everything else is just artifact.
Yeah. That's fascinating. How did this affect because you were, I have this expression of, hoop jumpers in a way, like people who get all the right grades, go to all the right schools, get all the right credentials, like and I don't mean this doesn't mean to be like disparaging in a way, but like they jump through all the right hoops exquisitely, and they've like built this life now, and it can be like a really prosperous and a great life. But so many of the hoops that they jump through were fabrications, and often like malicious fabrications. So what was it like for you emotionally when you realized like this system that I've been immersed in is fundamentally corrupt?
It was. It happened that there were two events that stand out in my mind. One is I went to the American Gastroenterological Association meeting one year. We would bring our science over and present. Now, there were 14,000 gastroenterologists in New Orleans, gathering. It was not a good time in America to have diarrhea, okay? Because all the gastroenterologists were in New Orleans, all right? And they gathered there, and it heavily funded by the pharmaceutical companies, GlaxoSmithKline, or Glaxo at the time, SmithKline Beecham on the other, huge amounts of money. I think the party cost, their party, Glaxo's party, cost $9 million or $6 million. It was incredible at the time, a lot of money. And we were in what is now the casino in New Orleans. And they had a reenactment of the Mardi Gras coming through this huge auditorium, and people there drinking and eating at the sort of expense of the pharmaceutical company.
Right.
And I looked there, and they were on top. There's a guy on top of the float throwing plastic coins onto the floor. Plastic coins. And there were these doctors on their knees scrabbling to pick them up. And I looked at this one doctor on his knees, and he looked up at me, rather embarrassed, and he said, "It's for my children," and then turned around and carried on. And I just thought, this is a metaphor for the medical profession and its respective roles with the pharmaceutical. This is terrible.
Wow.
This is absolutely not what I want to be part of. And the other thing that then happened is that when you graduate, you get your medical Bachelor of Surgery, MBBS, which is like the MD. And then you go on and take professional higher exams for the Royal College of Surgeons and the Royal College of Pathologists and these other things. And when all of this happened, they started stripping that away. They started taking those letters after your name away. And at first, I was deeply saddened because you'd worked so hard. These were won by examination. They weren't given away or by publication. And they started taking them away. These things that, like you say, you worked for all your life, suddenly they're taken away. And then you realize that they're a mechanism of control. We can give you these things, my dear boy, but we can also take them away if you step out of line.
Yeah, stay in
and
your
that's
hoop.
what happened. And when that happened, they just became an artifact.
Yes.
I laughed. Take it. I don't care.
Yeah.
It's something that you've created as a way of exerting control over me, at least in part. I'm not interested. Take it. It's meaningless. And so there were a series of revelations of burning bushes on this road to where I am now. And those were sort of some that stand out. That initially you think they're one thing and they're sad and they're tragic and you've lost everything. On the other hand, you think, no, actually I've regained control of my destiny by treating these things as the artifacts that they really are.
Yeah, that's great. It's very empowering. I have two theories of conspiracy. So, like, when you and I first met and really pre-COVID, I was familiar with what I called the conspiracies of confluence. So, my shitty greedy idea goes to the World Economic Forum or the Bilderberg Group or some convention of some kind or gathering is for secret society, and it meets your shitty greedy idea and it makes a bigger shitty greedier idea. So it's confluence. It's a coming together of shitty greedy ideas. And I was also familiar with what I called the single origin points, which is, Illuminati, ancient families, black nobility, deep rabbit hole stuff. That these conspiracies emanate from single origin points that have some global sense of where they want the world to go. And pre-COVID, I was like, I know about that stuff. I don't really buy it. I think it's mostly greed and mostly kind of this theory of confluence. After COVID and after Epstein's Island, I am for me, no one can say anything to convince me otherwise. There are single origin points in my mind that these ideas emanate from very, I'm worried, terrified, black, dark, ancient origins almost. Where do you stand with that, having seen this and lived through it, and now COVID, where they essentially got 208 nations of the world to agree upon a complete fallacy, to literally change human biology? So after having lived these experiences and now also seen this expressed at a global level with the MMR vaccines and all that other bullshit. Like, where do you sit on terms of conspiracy, and like, what's your cosmological view of the world?
That's a good question. You know what? I haven't dared to explore it too deeply as a sort of that single point origin issue. What I have observed is that there is a pattern of human behavior which assumes that there is an intellectual and financial elite that has every right, has this predestined right by virtue of their inheritance or some divine intervention to control the destiny of the planet. And it really is literally a handful of people. There were a handful of scientists who made the decision that gain of function was a good thing, that we could mutate these highly dangerous, highly versatile organisms and control them, adapt them, modify them, mutate them, and exert control over them. And this is one of the most naive things you'll ever come across, that nature will find a way. And this is why Jurassic Park is such an extraordinary insight into this kind of thing, that we have the technology to do it, to repair these dinosaur genes, ancient dinosaur genes with frog genes, and then we forget that that frog is capable of changing gender from male to female. So while we built a cadre of dinosaurs that are all female, what we've forgotten is that our gain of function experiments inadvertently have given them the ability to become male, and now they can reproduce, and now they become a real threat to the entire world. Now, Crichton's genius, but so I'm sort of getting off topic. But it's like Tony Fauci is such a classic example of this elitist mentality. I am science. People, when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they forget their ideological bullshit and take the vaccine. That kind of thinking. Your thinking isn't ideological. Mine isn't ideological. It's based on genuine real-world concerns that what they've done is dangerous. We're right. Fauci is wrong. But that's how these elites think, whether they're Bilderberg or they're Bill Gates or whoever they are. They believe that because they have excelled at one thing, they have a right to excel, or they will excel at everything. I had some friends once, years ago, who were traders in the city of London, made a fortune, extremely effective bond traders. And there was a belief amongst those people that because they were so successful at bond trading, which was such a narrow little sort of corner of even the financial markets, that their opinion on everything globally was sort of beyond criticism. They had this opinion, and it was right because they made a bonus of $6 million. That's how they think. And there is this tendency for, and then of course these elites gather and reinforce each other in their sincere belief that they control the destiny of the world, and they're going to exert their will on the world. And so, then it grows and it becomes a very, very dangerous thing. And what fascinates me throughout all of this is that nature will find a way. Life finds a way. That if we offend nature, nature will exact a very high price, and it won't do it immediately. It will do so over a protracted period, and it'll be very, very painful for mankind. And we've seen that with gain of function, with Wuhan, with COVID. So that's the point I'm at now. And I would, but I'm very open to listening further to the broader conspiracy and the other elements of that group think that come in and define people's sort of worldview. So, terrifying, absolutely terrifying.
I have this thing. So, COVID and Epstein's Island happened at the same time, pretty much. Like the exposure of Epstein's Island and the prosecution and, his suicide. So I don't necessarily know what makes us human, but I have a belief system of what's not human. And so for me, abusing of children at an institutional level, and then the protection of that, that's not human to me. That's something other. And then also like our shared sanguinity, like our blood, that's one of the things that makes us human. And the intentional corruption of that, so that you've introduced DNA that's permanently altered. You've introduced RNA that's permanently altered human DNA, so that people who have received this vaccine, like their blood is something that's kind of other than human right now. It's been altered to an other than human status. Like human beings don't do that to one another. Like we need our blood. So organ donation, blood donation, these things have been irreparably altered. The fact that it's transmittable through saliva, like I have 13 and 16-year-old boys, like fuck STDs, like vaccine shedding, like who are you going to kiss? My 16-year-old like went like crazy over spring break and, mono, and then the mono turned into Epstein-Barr, and it was from making out with all different kinds of girls. And so like this corruption of things that are essentially human, the protection and preservation of children, and then to have systems that not only support that abuse and then protect those abusers, and then to knowingly manufacture something that permanently alters human blood. Like all bets are off these days. For me, I consider everything, no matter how outlandish it is, because I'm deeply concerned that there's something like non-human or other than human that's driving this. Because if you don't, as a conscious human being, think that the preservation and the healthy development of children is a fundamental responsibility you have as a human being, that's something other than human. And if you think for a second that the corrupting of human blood at a global scale is something acceptable, like that's other than human behavior. So I have a pretty kind of clear worldview these days, and I'm terrified at what might be organizing the movement, the totalitarian shifting of our societies right now. I'm like flat out terrified by it.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. I'm so glad that I grew up in a loving family with wonderful parents, and was never exposed to any form of sexual abuse. That because it changes you forever. You never recover from that.
Forever.
The damage done to these young children by whether it's the Catholic Church or whether it's Epstein or whoever it is, it is beyond evil. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
And so,
and then it's protected. I mean, Jimmy Salvi.
Savile,
oh my God, like the guy was
they know he's doing it. And they
knighted him, and he was a necrophiliac. He used to fuck corpses, and the whole Royal Society and elite British society, which really kind of sets the tone for the world. Like they knew it, they support it, they looked the other way, or maybe they participated in. Like holy moly! Like when you recognize that like a guy like that existed and a guy like that was knighted, like all bets are off. Like be suspicious about everything that you hear coming from like mainstream sources and so forth. Like you should be highly, highly skeptical. So yeah, it's a crazy world. God bless people like yourself, man. So you're having, it's interesting right now as a friend of yours, just to like, I think your experiences had you kind of grow beyond pride or anything like that. It's certainly not a topic to rejoice in, but, is there some level of satisfaction in a bizarre way of like, I tried to warn you?
There might be, except for the fact that the damage continues. Mm-hmm. There is such a determination to continue the gravy train, to profit, to create. So you have all of the current old-fashioned vaccines, measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, hepatitis, all these things, they're failing. We're developing resistant viruses in the same way that with antibiotics we developed antibiotic resistant by the overuse or the inappropriate use, making assumptions about nature and our ability to control it. And the problem with that is that they're now saying we're going to use mRNA to make all of these vaccines. Can you imagine the damage that's going to inflict on mankind? And there will be this unnatural selection that those who opt to take it will not procreate, will not reproduce. Their genes will not be perpetuated, and they will die out. And that's just neo-Darwinian evolution in action, I'm afraid. And so it's very, very sad. I've forgotten quite how we got into this particular issue, but
well, I was sharing my thoughts about like single origin point and how when you just take an honest assessment of the facts and history as we know it, like all bets are off. Like it's terrifying and it's not a great way. Although, in some ways it will help you navigate and orchestrate your life as an individual, and especially as a parent. Like if you certainly know who not to trust, it will help you in your decision making. You will make less bad decisions, I think, in some ways. You'll keep your family on track.
What's interesting, of course, Adam, is that here we are having this conversation. There are many, many podcasts across the country, across the world, having a similar conversation. When I was involved in this at the beginning, there were 5 people in the world prepared to talk about the thorny issue of vaccine safety. Now it's more than half the adult population of the world. And COVID, the silver lining of the COVID cloud is just that. So what people need to realize is that these people, this small group of elites making these appalling decisions are only powerful as long as we allow them to be powerful. We are far more than they are, and we need to say no. We need to realize our power. We need to understand each other, put other differences to one side and say, in this setting, absolutely not. We no longer trust you. You've lied to us, you've lied to us, you've lied to us, you're incompetent, you don't know what you're doing, you've got it wrong on so many fronts. Your mainstream media conduit to the mind of the public is now dying. It's over to Joe Rogan and people like you who are telling the world what's really going on. And so the power of the mainstream media has dissipated beyond all recognition.
But I wanted to bring this up now. So this podcast is happening, 3 days after Robert F. Kennedy Jr., like one of my personal heroes, and I think a friend or a colleague of yours, visited Texas and went on to say, the best way to deal with this current measles outbreak is with the continuation of the MMR vaccine. When he literally wrote in the foreword of his book about the danger of that vaccine specifically. Like, how powerful are these groups and organizations? Like, can we sidetrack for a moment? Like, is there some 9-dimensional chess that's happening, or did they get to this guy as well? Do they have him compromised?
I really don't believe that. I think that his position, the difficult position he was in, is he was faced with an immediate problem, and that was the measles outbreak. You could argue, and I would argue, well, offer them the single vaccine. Take away the MMR, they don't need mumps and rubella, and at least give them the choice. Parents must have the choice, fully informed consent. But if they choose to break the cycle of this current epidemic, that may be one way of doing it. The key for Kennedy is going to be getting the Vaxxed-Unvaxxed study performed using huge databases like the Vaccine Safety Data Link. These databases have been withheld from the public from any kind of scrutiny forever. The CDC, the head of the NIH, said in the White House, we will not do that study. We will never do that study comparing completely unvaccinated children, health outcomes with fully vaccinated children. And they won't do it because they know what the answer will be. So when Kennedy's done that study and has that information, then he will be in a position to enact his policies if it shows what we believe it will show and what previous.
So you're hopeful. So you're hopeful that his strategy is to give them enough rope so that they hang themselves. That if we shut this off, it prevents the true kind of gold standard double placebo controlled studies that are going to need it to really shut down this assault of vaccines that's happening in our world and on our children.
I think put the Texas outbreak, put it, it's a temporary phenomenon, allowing him the time. He's had to deal with it in the short term, but get that vax-unvax study done, which is he's getting done. And if that shows what we believe, then all bets are off. Because what it means is that you can't mandate vaccination.
Mm-hmm.
You have got to give parents fully informed consent about all the risks and all the benefits. And you've got to be honest about it. You've got to make alternatives available. You've got to take the pressure off schools for policing vaccine policy. That's not their job.
No.
Their job is to teach children.
Right.
So do not make it their job to force children to get vaccinated. You've got to dissociate the pharmaceutical companies from the CDC, the FDA, who now are owned by them. They're owned by the pharmaceutical companies. You've got to put a firewall between those two so that issues of safety and efficacy are assessed completely independently of influence from the pharmaceutical companies. There are a whole string of things that he can do subsequent to that study result coming out, should it show what we believe it will show. And that's their fear.
Yeah. Well, listen, I hope you're right, because I'm like, for me, past this prologue, and I see you arm in arm with Rabbi Shmuley, who's like a enforcer for Mossad and some of these other agendas. And, Kennedy's got to be smart enough to know who was really involved in killing of his father and all this kind of thing. So I'm worried that these super high level powers that we don't even know about, that they've got to him somehow. I pray God that's not the case, and that, he and Trump are kind of doing this, give enough rope to hang themselves. And they have to play this kind of high-level chess. But I don't know, man. I'm very concerned.
Maybe I'm a pathological optimist.
Yes.
Yeah. But I am. I do believe that nature is self-correcting. And everything we've done, the assault we've, put on nature, will be self-correcting in the long term. But not without mankind having to pay a very big price.
Yeah. It's it's interesting. Like when I talk to friends and family or former friends, and I'm like, hey man, I'm like, I don't want to pull rank, but I'm batting 1,000 here. Like, I was talking about chemtrail in 1998. I've been talking about vaccines since 2001. I was warning you about COVID from day one. Like,
well, you get it.
When are you going to listen?
How many times do I have to be right?
Right. And this current thing, you're believing this current thing. I have this way. I've become a globe skeptic. I'm really down the rabbit hole. And I love talking about globe skepticism or flat earth, because it's the only conspiracy that has a happy ending, that we live on God's eternal plane, under God's firmament. Now, act accordingly. You're divine. I'm divine. We were created in the image and likeness of the Creator. Act accordingly. It's, you get to the bottom of the Kennedy assassination. It's like, oh crap, those guys did it. Damn it. Nothing's good. There's no conspiracy that has a happy ending. But the way that I'm very compelling the way I talk about this, because if somebody's like, I have this one shirt, my family got it to my mom, my wife got it for me as a joke. It's called the Flat Earth Society, and I'll wear it around sometimes. And I was in Whole Foods the other day, and a girl working there came up. She goes, "Sir, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." I thought it was I had no idea what it was about. I forgot the shirt I was wearing. She's like, "Do you really think the Earth is flat?" I'm like, "Well, how much time do you have?" And she says, "Maybe 3 minutes." I'm like, "I think I can do it." I said, "Let's not even talk about flat earth. Let's not even talk about globe skepticism. Let's start with American history as you were taught about. Let's talk about the sinking of the USS Maine, the Spanish-American War. It was faked, okay? They knew a boiler blew up, but they found it convenient. If they blame it on the Spanish, we can have that war. Now let's go to World War I and the sinking of the Lusitania. The Germans were notifying us that they knew we were putting weapons on these cruise liners going back and forth, and they were going to sink the Lusitania. They sent it to newspapers. Our government suppressed it. We knew we had to get that sunk, and then we got into World War I. World War II, because of Rockefeller, we had a 9-year oil embargo in the South China Sea, so Japan was dying. They couldn't get any oil because Rockefeller was taking it all. They notified us that they were going to bomb Pearl Harbor. We suppressed that notification. We took the bombing. We allowed the destruction of property and lives, and then we got into World War Two. And then we come to Vietnam, and fuck it, why even bother blowing a boat up? Let's just fake the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Let's just make the whole thing up. And then we go to crack cocaine coming into this country with the Iran-Contra. Okay, the CIA did that as well. And then we have the bombing in Oklahoma City, and that doesn't make any sense, and that's really suspicious. And that had all the Whitewater records. And now we go to 9/11, and like, who the hell believes that? I mean, don't even talk about the towers. Let's just talk about Tower 7. And the girl says, what's Tower 7? I'm like, oh, that's the 50-story building that was a quarter mile away that collapsed like a perfect pancake from a fire burning a quarter mile away with temperatures that could never melt steel in a fashion where a building would collapse like a perfect pancake. And it just happened to house all the CIA financial records of the missing $2.3 trillion. And then we go to COVID, and nobody believes COVID was an abject fucking lie that they're moving us into. So like, once you recognize that the whole 19th and 20th and 21st century of American history is largely based on falsification and fraud, where do the lies?
What can you believe?
Like, where do the lies?
Go after that?
Where do the lies begin? Like, where do they begin? Where do they end? Like, once you recognize that pattern of pathological lying, you got to question everything. And the girl's like, oh my God. She's like, you've given me a lot to think about. I'm like, yeah, I know. Now start thinking. And she's like, I will. So I just find it such a fascinating time that we're living in, man. Like the whole Rockefeller medical establishment. There's a guy who's a friend of mine. I was on his podcast called The Way Forward, Alex Zeck. Brilliant young man. He did an AI analysis on viruses and using all the leading AI platforms in this Socratic level of questioning. There is not an AI platform that will recognize that a single virus has ever been identified outside of the solution that they constantly use to identify viruses, cow pus, all the other things. Like, so our whole, because before we had virology, we had toxology, and medical doctors were led to believe like the body's become toxic. Let me treat the toxins, and you can deal with that. Like, oh, you're eating this thing that's toxic, or you're living in this environment that's toxic. Let's rebalance you, and let's use our spectrum of, I'm talking like early 20th century. Let's use our spectrum of plant medicines and allopathic medicines that we have to heal the whole human that I'm dealing with. And then the Rockefeller medical system came along and said, we need to find stuff to do, what we can do with these petroleum products that were created, So then you get fertilizers and fungicides and herbicides and pharmaceutical products. And then they recruit all the highest young doctors, and they're like, you're going to be our next generation. They wine them and dine them in England, and they own the textbooks, and then they buy the textbooks. So like our whole modern history is based on so much fraud that like we're all becoming like aware of this right now. So it's a terrifying time to be alive, but it's kind of fascinating because the illusion is like collapsing. And you're in the thick of it. You were the guy who was like, had everything wrong and somehow had this bizarre agenda. But you were the guy that had everything right and really gave a shit about human beings, So it's kind of like a bizarre victory lap.
Yes. I may or may not, but take it one day. I don't think so. But I can say to my grandchildren on my deathbed,
yes.
I believe I did the right thing for the right reasons. Yeah. And I can live with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is
whatever history says.
Yeah, that's a powerful epitaph for sure, Talk to us about your filmmakers. Give us let's go back to your life story, your career. So, now you're in Texas and they come after you in Texas. So you don't win the lawsuit, which you should definitely have one. The judge throws it out. So how did you then redirect and then the documentary films and filmmaking and talk to us about how that life transition?
Just on that note, if anyone wants to read an independent assessment of all of the evidence presented at the General Medical Council, including all of the allegations of Brian Deere and others, then there is a website on Substack called Euripides. An independent lawyer has analyzed everything and placed it on there. And if anyone wants to scrutinize the data...
It has a link, right?
It has a link.
Okay, so
Euripides, you go to Substack, you look up Euripides.
We'll put a direct link in the show notes as well.
So What was the question again?
Oh, then you pivoted. So like
film.
basically the rug.
Yes,
So can I just ask you real quickly, like when you lost everything, like how were you making ends meet at the time?
I wasn't. That was the problem. I mean,
did you have some support network or that you were able to borrow some money or do something? Like how did you just?
I some friends who could said, look, we're going to fund you, at least in the short term, which they did, and that was wonderful. In fact, I got a call from Jim Carrey.
Oh,
and
yeah, that's right, because he was going through with his wife at the time.
He was, and he was, Jim Carrey called me, and it was the first call I got when I got back to England, and he said, I heard what happened, I'm really sorry, and we're going to do everything we can to help you out. And so a group of them got together.
That was when he was still married to Jenny McCartney. And
they were boyfriend and girlfriend at the time.
And they had a vaccine in their child.
That's right. And so that helped enormously. Just the encouragement.
Yeah.
There was sort of the fact that it's Jim Carrey on the phone. My children couldn't believe it. Anyway, I wanted to make film. I love film. I've been writing for a long time. And I decided that I had some extraordinary stories that needed to be told. The first story I'll tell you about, which is very interesting, and we were making a fly-on-the-wall documentary about getting children better. It was a 3-part reality TV series before getting them treated properly with the children with autism, during and after, and showing the healing of the family as a consequence of the appropriate intervention with medical care for these children. And that was fun until we got involved with a child in Chicago. We were called up to see him, big child, angry, aggressive, nonverbal, very destructive, very violent. And we went to see him. He was in 4-point locked restraints in the pediatric intensive care unit, chained to the bed by handcuffs, 14 years old.
So strong, too.
Oh, strong. A big, strong kid. And they put him on, he was locked up for a total of about 80 days. And they put him on 28 psychotropic medications. 28. It was an abject failure of medicine. And it was the drugs that were making him violent. And so they would give him one drug to offset the side effects of the other drug, the next and the next and the next. Absolute disaster, testament to the failure of medicine to even understand this problem. So we got him out of locked restraints. We drove him through the night to New York, got him scoped, had a colonoscopy, identified inflammation. He was put on the right treatment. He then went back to Chicago, and his mother and father were estranged. She had nowhere to live. She was traveling around in their van with him and with his aunt. And every time this little boy, going from hotel to motel, would hear a siren, they were coming to take him away and lock him up again.
Oh, God.
And he would have a meltdown, and he would destroy the room, and they'd end up with black eyes and bleeding lips and this kind of thing. And the next time we saw him, he was back in 4-point locked restraints in a children's hospital in Chicago. And everything had changed. The mother had lost, she had no energy left. She was completely broken. The aunt was sitting there with a huge black eye, and the boy was chained up, and it was tragic. We left and we went to try and find somewhere, a safe haven to recover this child and get him away from the medical system. And in the week that we were looking, his mother stabbed him to death and tried to take her own life, as did the godmother. And it was an utterly tragic, tragic situation. She just could no longer cope. The local media portrayed this as a mother who hated her child, her damaged child, and just wanted to end his life. And it was a terrible story. It was completely untrue. She loved him. She was devoted to him, but she cracked. She could take no more of this. And it was better to die and leave it all behind than face further problem. Well, the end of that story, we thought, we have all of the information. Here is the media telling one story. We have been filming this throughout. We're going to make a film. It was called Who Killed Alex Bordalakis? The irony inherent in the title with a question mark is, was it the mother or was it the medical system that actually killed him? And we made the film. We submitted it as a documentary. It wasn't a great visual piece of cinematography because it was shot as a fly on the wall.
Yeah.
But the story was utterly compelling. And then 4 years later, she was in maximum security for life. She was in prison for life for aggravated murder, no parole. And I got a call from her lawyer in Chicago, and he said, Andy, I got a call from the state's prosecutor who was responsible for putting her away. She had yet to be charged. 4 years later, she was in prison, still had not come to court.
Oh, sure.
And the state's prosecutor said, I understand a film was made about this. We'd like to see it. And it was sent, Aldo Botti, the lawyer, sent it to him. He called him a week later and he said, we've watched this film. We can no longer prosecute this case in the same way. She will be released from prison next week.
Wow.
And for the first time in American legal history, a film changed the outcome of a murder case like
Wow.
that. It was extraordinary. And so there was an element of justice. It would be impossible to say there was a happy ending.
Yeah.
But there was at least a modicum of justice that told the true story. And that it persuaded me of the power of film, the ability of film to tell extraordinary stories. And because of the position I'd taken over the years, people had come to me from federal agencies like the CDC and from the industry, the vaccine manufacturers, and said, we have done a really bad thing and here is the evidence. So I thought, you know what, these would make amazing film. And so that's when we made Vaxxed about William Thompson. And then we made Protocol 7, which was my first feature film about the Merck fraud in respect of mumps vaccine. And we've just come back from Thailand. That film actually has won, I think, 34 film awards.
Which one?
Already, Protocol 7.
Oh, great. Yeah. No, I enjoyed it very much. I was at the premiere,
that was a real, we're not in it for award, but it was just, it was
It's nice
that the mainstream system, which is usually pitted against this kind of thing, was willing to entertain that film. That was great. And now we've just come back from making a COVID film, something I said I'd never write. Never write. How many people, how many unemployed screenwriters are there in Hollywood right now writing that movie? I don't want to get into that melee of inconsequential bullshit, about half of it funded by pharma and, telling a completely. So we came across an extraordinary story, which I won't spoil now, but it took place in a story that took place in Thailand amidst the global tragedy of COVID, and had far-reaching implications for everybody. And so we went to Thailand and shot that. Just got back, and now we're deep in post-production.
Oh, good. Yeah. I got a sense of when that might get released?
Well, it's moving forward very quickly. And so I think it should be ready to be released by the end of the summer.
Oh, great.
Now, there will be some time for promotion, but I think we'll have a final polished cut of the film.
Oh, great. Great.
That'll be popular.
Yeah. And your second feature film, how is it maturing you as a director? What did you learn from your first film? How did you apply it to your second? How do you feel your craft evolving?
Well, I'm not a technical director, so you do not like Robert Rodriguez, do your own filming and these. I love actors. I love spending time with actors. I love changing up the story or changing up the delivery of the story. And I did a lot of directing courses. I went to LA. The most fun was I turned up and there were all these young aspiring directors, male and female. All the girls were actors, ex-actors, and all of the boys were editors, and they all wanted to be directors. I was the old guy.
Yeah.
And what you did is you cast from these wonderful actors who would turn up for nothing and no fee. And they turn up at the weekends. They do a scene in front of you. You'd say, I'd like that one and that one. And you put together a specific scene of a film, or in this case, a story I'd written. And then you rehearse it, and a week later, after attending all the lectures and everything else, you turn up, and in front of everybody, you have to direct on stage this scene and do this. And it was terrifying, and it was the most fun I've ever had. It was absolutely wonderful.
Oh, interesting.
And so I enjoyed that so much. It was called the tools workshop, their director's tools. And it was, I love that. And I love actors. Why do I love actors? And it's not just simply being obsequious, but I was driving, when I was living in LA, around the time I met you, I was driving down one of those long roads on the way to the airport, and there was a line of girls, 50 girls, standing outside of a studio waiting to go in to take their turn to audition for this one part.
Yeah.
I assumed. And they were all reading their notes, reading the script. And I thought, good Lord, that is the toughest job in the world. I trained as a surgeon, okay? And that's really, really tough. But when you get into the operating theater and you're taking out a gallbladder, there aren't 50 people lined up outside the operating theater saying, I can do it better than him. And I can certainly do it better than this clown next to me. And he doesn't look right for the job. And and I just thought, this is the toughest job in the world. One of you is going to get picked, maybe. And the rest of you are never going to be told why you didn't get picked. You'll get no feedback at all, but you've got to keep doing the same thing time and time and time again. This is the toughest job ever. And so I kind of fell in love with actors and their craft, and I studied because that's just my nature as an academic. I read and read and read. And then there comes a time when you've got to put all the books aside, all the courses aside, all the tutorials aside, and you've just got to get out there and direct. Yeah. And I absolutely loved it. I got to direct Eric Roberts and others in the first movie. And these are seasoned actors, and this clown comes along thinking he can tell them what to do. But I think my experience in medicine and everything I've been through gave me an unusual, if not unique, insight into the human soul, into understanding people and what motivates them and subtext. And so
also a level of confidence. Like if you have a human body that's literally like you're taking a scalpel and that life depends on you, I'd have to imagine that it can correlate to high levels of confidence walking into other situations.
Yeah. And I'd written the script, so I understood what it was that I wanted from these actors. And then I loved what they did with it.
Yeah.
So one of the things I would do is walk on set, and I would say, I would not direct them at all. I would just say, right, let's see how you play this.
Yeah.
Let's see what you do. Because sometimes there's a gem in there. There's an absolute gem. And you hadn't anticipated. And then you effect your changes, a few suggestions at a time. Let's try this, and grab his arm and squeeze it at this point. And then the scene builds, and everybody sees it. This is the fun of it, is that when you take that first cut, sometimes it's flat and there's no action. They're just reciting the lines. And then you add a little drama, a little movement, a little action to it, a look here, a reaction shot there. And it transforms it. And everybody sees it. Everybody from the director of photography to the first AD to the crew to the actor, everybody senses it. And so they gain in confidence that what you're doing is making a much richer drama.
Yeah.
And so... And it's very reinforcing because often it surprises me as well. So I love it. I wish I'd, in some way, no regrets, but I wish I'd come to it earlier because you never stop learning.
Yeah.
There is so much to learn and so many great directors to learn from. But I love doing it. I'll go on doing it until I'm as old as Clint Eastwood and older.
Do you feel more on point? I guess I'd say more in flow state now as a filmmaker and director, or when you were like really in the groove before the whole vaccine nonsense started and you were running a team and you were in the midst of your career as a young doctor and so forth? Does one feel more authentic and kind of flow state than the other, or different stages of your life, impossible to compare?
Just different. Yeah. There are elements that are the same, and you captured one of them, the teamwork. So you had a team of researchers or an operative team doing surgery. There was very much a team feeling, and that's the same on set. You've got a team, and they're looking to you. They want you to know that you know what you want. You come to this prepared. So directing is 80%, 90% preparation.
Yeah.
So you come to it with the adjustments in mind, how we want to try this, the inflections, the inference, and you get that, hopefully, from your actors with those few gems that you hadn't anticipated. But the team see that you know what you want, and when you've got it, you move on. Mm-hmm. You don't go on taking another 10 just in case.
Right.
Just for safety, people say, no, actually, we've got what we want, and it's in there. Let's move to the next scene. Keep this flowing, keep the actors fresh, and always test them. If they want to do another take, which often they do, let them show how versatile they are. Let them give me some other option. Never prevent them from doing that. Honor their craft, but don't beat a dead horse. When you've got what you want, move on.
So, Andy, you've lived an extraordinary life. You've been at the forefront of massive cultural change, scientific controversy, and now you're at kind of the cultural forefront with your filmmaking. Are you fundamentally, I mean, I know you touched on this earlier, but are you fundamentally optimistic about where we're going as a world? Like where do you stand? Where do you see like our world in the United States and the world kind of moving over the next bit?
I am optimistic. I don't know quite why sometimes. I question my sanity, but I do believe that nature, and we're all part of nature, is self-correcting, that it will put right many of the wrongs that we've committed, and that there is a prevalence of good people in the world. They need to realize it. They need to wake up to the fact. They need to exert their authority over the few who have malign or ignorant intent and prevail. That can happen for sure.
Yes.
And our interaction now is part of that process. So I am confident. And I look at my grandchildren, and there's every reason to be confident, as long as we don't give up the fight, as long as there's a line in the film that we've just shot where a newly pregnant girl says, "What awaits Randeep?"
Say that again.
What Randeep is the baby's name?
Yeah.
Nicole. What world awaits Randeep?
Oh.
And the husband says, "The world we fight for." And that really sums it up. We must acknowledge that and continue that fight.
Yeah. Well, you've been an extraordinary fighter. I feel very fortunate that, whatever fate, destiny kind of crossed our paths, and we're friends, and in some way Brain Supreme, has helped you on your creative,
absolutely,
on your creative path. So that's great, man. Thank you so much. Yeah, you're a fascinating guy. Oh, how do people follow you, get in touch with you? We'll put it all in the show notes, but
that's great. I will get Jacqueline, who's my assistant. She'll send everything to you. Cool. And that would be very helpful.
Good. Do you have a website, or do you have?
We do. If you go to yow.tv, we have a channel there where all the films are playing. We've set up a new streaming service for independent film. There's so many independent films out there that may get awards in award ceremonies, but never make it onto the screen because they're not overtly commercial. But there's some great films out there by independent filmmakers that are never given an opportunity. That's what Yow TV exists for, yow.tv. Go and see it. We're going to have our own film festival. We're going to get these films out there, make them available for people to see, and break the Hollywood model, get away from that big money model and have a lot of fun. So Yow is a hybrid Eastern word for freedom. So it's really freedom.tv, yow.tv. So please go there, and my films are available.
Yeah. I was at the premiere of Protocol 7, which was terrific, and I was so happy for you about that. And then in preparation for this, I watched Vaxxed and Vaxxed 2, which are very hard to do. It was very challenging for me emotionally. But they're really important films. I would encourage everybody to watch them, especially if you know young people who are married and starting their lives and thinking about getting pregnant and going on this whole, how to confront the modern medical system and protect the health of your child and fetus and so forth. It's important education, and it kind of lets you, as a friend, like off the hook because you go say, hey, look at these, watch these, think about this. And then you've at least done your part in the world. And it's one of the things that I really like, I want to thank you for. And I'm very appreciative. Like you're the guy who's like created the films that somebody like me who cares, but doesn't necessarily want to be at war with the world around them. You say, maybe take a look at this, or here, I just sent you a link, watch that. So, God bless you. Keep up the fight.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Great to see you.
All right. Good seeing you. Thanks so much.